How do you avoid undercharging a client for your design services? There's probably times where you've sent a quote to a client, you've felt good about it, and then halfway through the project, you realized you've underquoted massively. You're hit with endless revisions, the content is coming through in dribs and drabs, incomplete and in small portions. There's extra meetings and extra deliverables, so what you thought was originally a 2-week job has now become a 6-week drama. And there might have been nothing wrong with your original price, but the real problem has to do with how you've scoped the project. Undervaluing a project often begins before the project's been briefed properly. A client asks for a quick quote and puts you under a bit of pressure to give them a cost estimate. It might be on the phone or in front of people, and you might be asked for a brochure or a website cost. And you don't want to lose the opportunity, so you throw together a number and just hope for the best. But the problem is, you're quoting before you've actually understood what the project involves. You need more detail to accurately quote and to avoid the scope expanding as you begin. So before I quote anything, I try to think through 4 things. 1, what are the actual deliverables? Firstly, what are we creating? And like I said, it's not simply a brochure or a website. You need more detail than that. So you need to think about things like, how many pages? Is it for print or digital or both? Will there be multiple variations? Are there any additional assets required, like infographics, illustration, custom icons, launch assets for social and EDM? Because sometimes a project sounds simple until you realize there's about 20 hidden different deliverables inside it. Secondly, what's the process required to get there at the end result? Clients aren't just paying for the final design, they're paying for a process. So is there an existing brand guidelines document that we can reference, or will the design process include strategy and concept development? And if so, how many concepts are we presenting? How many revision rounds? How many stakeholders are involved? Because, that can lengthen the review time, the number of changes, or the level of detail you go to on the job. Does it require extra workshops, presentations, meetings, production management? For example, a small business approving something quickly is very different to a committee of 6 stakeholders all giving feedback at different times. The same deliverable could have completely different workloads. And what about additional costs or incidentals that come up? This one catches a lot of designers out because you can't just bundle everything together and hope the project stays profitable. You need to think about what will it actually take to deliver it properly. For example, designing a publication, have you accounted for the stock image licensing, the image retouching, creating the infographics and diagrams, generative AI tools and premium features, proofing, print management, courier costs, travel and site visits perhaps, even consultation time? They're not standard design fees because they're often just very project specific. So if you forget to include them in your quote, you'll end up absorbing them in the project and it'll overall become less profitable. Lastly, you should leave some room for, extras that might pop up. Design is not just a deliverable, it's a process, and no design process stays perfectly within scope. Content arrives late, people change their minds, new requests pop up. There's always just something that shifts. So it doesn't mean to overcharge, it just means to quote realistically and be clear about what you're charging for. You don't need to itemize everything in detail, but just be clear about what you're including and excluding. Because the more you are clear and upfront about what's included and excluded, it just builds better trust with the client. For example, what happens when they ask for working files? Is that an additional cost or do you include it? Some designers include them, some don't. There's no rule on what to do. But you might think to yourself, well, those working files actually contain a lot of my intellectual property, my methods and my skill that I've spent years trying to learn and apply. So there's value in that and that should be charged for. So those kind of details should be specified in your quote. Ultimately, if there is one thing that I can suggest when it comes to quoting is not to start with the price. Start with the scope. Get the client on the call and ask them to explain what the job is. Understand the deliverables, the process, think about hidden costs, leave some wiggle room in quoting, and just be upfront about what's included and excluded. So you're not just guessing a number, but you've understood the project well enough so that the number actually makes sense. Well, if this has helped, I'll next talk about something that designers often question and whether that's they should charge hourly or a fixed project fee. And thanks for watching.